Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Andy Serwer, Bowdoin class of 1981. I'm a journalist and on the college's board of trustees, and I want to introduce to you and welcome our guest, Sharon Daley, who will be receiving an honorary degree from Bowdoin at Commencement tomorrow. Sharon is a registered nurse who is the board vice president of the Beacon Project, which is an Islesboro elder care nonprofit that runs the assisted living home Boardman cottage. Yeah. She has dedicated her career to delivering healthcare to those without easy access and strengthening coastal and island communities through education and connection. And a really fascinating thing is the past 22 years, she has served as the Maine Seacoast Missions Director of Island Health and a nurse on the Sunbeam, which is the mission's boat, until her retirement in December of 2022. Sharon, we talk a lot here at Bowdoin about the common good, but you are a living embodiment of that, doing that every single day. And we are most grateful and deeply honored ourselves to be recognizing you. So thank you and congratulations. Thank you for your service and congratulations. Thank you for coming down from Islesboro.
Thank you.
So let's start with the name of this talk, which is what happens when the tide goes out. And that may have meaning to those of you who know about the big tides up in that part of the world. So what does happen when the tides go out?
I kind of had nothing to do with choosing this title, but when I saw it, I thought, this is so funny because particularly when we go to Matinicus Island on the Sunbeam, we do ground out. When the tide leaves, we're flat on the bottom. So I just thought it was a great title.
It really works. I know there's some people here who probably know these islands intimately, and maybe others don't even know what we're talking about, but I think there's a lot here in this conversation. We'll speak to both sort of camps, and for those of you who are in between. You have worked up there for so many decades. I thought you grew up in that neck of the woods, but you didn't. So tell us where you're from originally, where you grew up, and how you got into this line of work.
Well, I grew up, people think this is really funny, I grew up on a farm in Missouri, which people go, and now you work on islands, but there were really a lot of similarities. It was a very isolated community, small community, and lifestyle between farmers and lobsters is not that much different. So it helped me in my work, I think.
Meaning that these people are people who have to depend on nature for their livelihoods and are
depending on the weather, and if you have a good crop, whether it's lobsters or corn, the price goes down.
So how did you get from Missouri to Maine, though?
Well, I came out to work in Boston as a nurse because I was always going to head west, but I had a couple of friends in Boston. They said, come to Boston. I flew into Boston one night, went out the next night to dancing at a bar and met my husband, and my roommate married his roommate, and then we moved to Maine because we didn't want to live in the city. So that's how that happened. And then I saw, I've done a lot of different nursing jobs, and I saw the advertisement for this Maine Seacoast Mission job, and it was the perfect job. It was great.
So it was go east, young woman.
Yeah.
Right.
I had no sense of direction. I always took a wrong turn there.
Makes perfect sense. So this job of being an RN and going out on this boat to these islands, I mean, what was that like? How would you describe it?
It's hard to describe, but as I said, it was the perfect job. The Maine Seacoast Mission has been around for over 100 years, and this is the 5th Sunbeam, and it's a large boat that's very seaworthy. And the Maine Seacoast Mission was approached about doing a telemedicine program, which, 25 years ago, nobody was doing telemedicine. But there was also no real health care to the islands, and to go off of an island to even have something like a lab draw could take you 3 days because there's just not consistent transportation. It was very expensive. So the Maine Seacoast Mission years ago had nurses going out to the islands. In fact, they sometimes would put a nurse on an island for the winter. So this seemed like a real good fit for the islands, and I'd done a lot of home health and lived on an island, so I was lucky enough to get chosen to do that. So we started the program and chose providers that had a link to those particular islands, and started doing telemedicine. There was a room on the boat that was set up with telemedicine equipment. And once I started, I saw that there was a need for more things like mental health counseling, addiction counseling, blood draws, education, screening clinics, flu shots. And so just kind of, as we saw a need, we tried to fill it.
And you were based in Islesboro, that's where you lived?
That's where I live, yeah. And I would go off and go to Northeast Harbor, which is up by Bar Harbor, to get on the boat. And then we would go from there.
Right, these are the islands off of MDI.
Yeah.
Not Desert Island. And
you're the Rockland area, mid-coast.
Right. And you were gesturing like that because we have some slides that we'll get to in a little bit that shows some of these things. So how many islands approximately were you serving or have you been serving?
5 regularly, 7 more irregularly. And then when I started an elder care conference, because elder care on islands is always, it's even harder than it is on the mainland, and people are reluctant to leave the island just as they're reluctant to leave their home. So some of the islands had elder care homes, and then we started one on Islesboro. So I started a support group because lots of elders don't have family on the islands anymore, so it would fall upon the community to take care of them. And the communities did take care of them, but often it was hard. So I started an elder care conference, and I think there were 9 islands. Even the Casco Bay Islands became involved. And we would hold an elder care conference every year and monthly meetings.
And the islands that you serve mostly don't have ferries, like Islesboro has a ferry.
Some of them have mail boats and some of them had ferries, but like Matinicus, they have an airstrip, so they also use that. But their ferry in the wintertime maybe comes once a month, and that's only if the weather is good enough.
So you mentioned some of them. Can you tick off the ones that you really serve mostly? Which ones?
So the cranberries, there's 2 cranberries off the coast of the MDI area. Idaho, Frenchboro, Matinicus. We did some things on Monhegan, some things on Swans.
Matinicus is the one that's the farthest out, right?
It's 21 miles offshore.
What kind of people live on Matinicus?
He asked me that earlier, and I told him the best people, because they are. I mean, I love those communities. They're full of special, interesting people. I always say this job taught me a lot about people, and the one thing that I really learned is nobody's all good and nobody's all bad. And some of the roughest, not always nice lobstermen's were often the one that was taking care of the little ladies down the road, bringing her food and making sure she was okay. They're independent. Islanders don't always get along, and frequently they don't get along, but when there's a problem, they all come together as an island family. And they kind of take in the mission employees, including me, as part of the island family, and that to me was one of the biggest compliments I ever had.
So what is the population like? I mean, it's really changing. And, you know, I was looking at the website. You talked about the organization being over 100 years old. The website's great. It has this really cool timeline with great photographs of the Angus and Alfred MacDonald, I think, were the 2 brothers who founded this thing, and I think in 1908 or something like that.
Right. They were 2 ministers that looked out at the islands and realized that they were not being served by any churches or pretty much anybody else, and started the mission. And the mission has always had a spiritual part to it, frequently has a minister or a chaplain, always has a minister or a chaplain aboard.
The boat until to this day?
Yeah, to this day, yeah. Right now it's a chaplain. And The islanders always, they don't like to be preached to a lot. They say we want somebody to marry us and bury us.
Okay. And
But there are church services and support, religious support for anybody that wants it.
right. And so the population, have you gone back and looked at what the population was 100 years ago versus today, or versus 20 years ago when you started? I mean, there's been a lot of change going on now.
Easily, I can look back during my time. Frenchboro, when I started, had 12 to 14 kids in school, and now there are no kids in the school. And in fact, last winter, they said there were like 5 people on the island.
So what's going on?
It's families, families used to grow up and the sons or the daughters would always become lobstermen, and now, there's a lot of different things. Also, a lot of people are just there in the summer. Even the lobstermen leave. It's funny because a lot of the young lobstermen goes, I want my kids to play sports. So they want to move off so their kids can be part of that community of sports. And then housing, a lot of the homes and waterfront property has been bought up. So even if a young family wants to stay on the island, how do they get a house? There's more and more seasonal homes on all of the islands. Even, Islesboro, which is, on Matinicus, they go, hell, Islesboro's not an island, because we have a ferry, a daily ferry that runs several times a day. And when my kids...
And a yacht club.
And a yacht club. That's one end of the island, not my end of the island. We had 100 kids in the school when my daughters were there, and now there's going to be 40 kids, and that's K through 12.
So it really feels like a way of life is just...
It's changing,
yeah.
for sure.
To these summer people, if you will, do you ever tend to them?
Yeah, definitely. And, a lot of the summer people love the island as much as I do. And I think that's one thing that's changing is there were old island families that had been coming there for generations. And, they are invested in the islands, they care about the islands, they understand the way of life. But those families kind of get watered down or died out, and so more people come that don't have that history, and some of them love the island and become involved, but not all of them. It's a vacation place for them.
What about those local families? I know this whole distinction between summer people and local people is a thing, of course, but were the local families, any of them there for hundreds of years?
Oh, yeah. Eagle Island, I didn't mention Eagle Island. There was really only one family, a husband and wife, that lived there. Recently, they've had to move off, but his family's been on Eagle Island for 200 years. So talking to Bob is like, it's just amazing, his stories and his recollections of what life was like.
Is Eagle Island down this way, or is that up there?
It's more mid-coast.
Mid-coast, okay, all right. And tell us about COVID, because that was a huge change, obviously, for you, and you had to really dig deep to serve.
Sometimes I think I can't even remember all of it because it was just so, there was so much going on, as there was for everybody. But the islands were really worried because it's a very close community with a lot of interaction. So the feeling was if one person got COVID, everybody was going to get COVID. And then the next question was, how do we get them off the island if they're really sick? Do we put them on the back of a lobster boat? But nobody knew how contagious it was. Botanicus was, we can't ask a pilot to come out and get them and put them in a plane. So there was a lot of anxiety around that. So I got in touch with MDI Hospital in Bar Harbor, said, would I be able to get vaccine from you? And they said they would do the best they could. And then I called the CDC, and we said, it really doesn't make sense to just go out and vaccinate, maybe 3 elders on the island. We want to go out and vaccinate everybody. And somehow they agreed to it.
The Islanders, you mean?
Well, the Islanders were all for it, but the CDC said yes. And I don't really know anywhere else that they let you do 18 and above immediately, and they let us do that.
This
So
must have been early on then.
that was at the very, very
Right,
beginning,
Right, yeah,
from
yeah.
day one.
And so what happened?
So we got a medical refrigerator and all kinds of thermometers because the vaccine had to be kept at a certain temperature and the vials could only be punctured so many times. And once you punctured it, it was only good for a certain number of hours. And figured out how to do this and go to islands and not waste vaccines. And luckily I had 2 wonderful nursing friends that I said, will you guys come with me? Because to be honest, it was a really scary time and I didn't want to be the only medical person giving a brand new vaccine. And we had epi and all of the things that we were supposed to have, but there was a lot to it, a lot of record keeping, a lot of paperwork. And so we just started with our first island and did that. And people were really amazingly grateful and happy. As I always said, people laughed, they cried, they danced. And, we set up in big community halls. And I remember the first time that we went out to the Cranberries and we, everybody had to stay around for 15 minutes afterwards. And we put seats far apart. And the neighbors would say, this is the first time we've seen anybody been in the same room with anybody, in like 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever.
And were you using the sunbeam or?
For some of the islands, but most of the islands we had, sunbeam only goes 10 knots at the fastest. So a lot we used planes and mailboats a lot.
You were skipping around with this refrigerated vaccine from mailboats. And
we did Matinicus and Monhegan on the same day, which unless you know where those islands are, doesn't sound like much. But we went to Monhegan on the mailboat, and they held the mailboat for us while we did the vaccines. And then we came back in, and I think, that's, close to a 2-hour ride on that boat. Came back in, had to drive to Rockland because the next day was going to be bad weather, and caught a plane and tried to get back before dark so that they could land. And even then, we would have to pick up the vaccine at MDI Hospital, drive it to Penn Bay Hospital in Rockland, ask them to store it in the refrigerator overnight. The pharmacists would meet us like at 6 o'clock in the morning to pick up the vaccine so that we could go then on another boat or another plane to get it. So the logistics were a lot, but I had a great team working with me, and we did it.
That's incredible. And by the way, part of it was, like A Dark and Stormy Night. There's this movie that Walgreens actually made of Sharon doing this, Sharon and her team, and the weather was terrible. I mean, it's this incredible film, and you can see it how do you find it? What's the best way to find it?
If you Google Walgreens COVID nurse.
That's it. It's actually a beautiful film. I mean, it's really incredible, and it just shows her carrying this thing in the boats. I mean, it's just incredible stuff.
Yeah, it was. The producer was just thrilled because it was such rough weather. Like this, it was so dramatic.
It was. It's really something.
Yeah, and we were using mailboats that day, but the mailboat had to cancel. They were a smaller boat because they couldn't go. And this is the thing I loved about islands, because it all kind of just happens around you. Like I knew that the boat had canceled, but of course I'm doing the vaccines, and they called around and found a lobsterman with the biggest boat. And he goes, oh yeah, I can do that. So then he comes in and we just all get on that boat. I don't even know what boat we're getting on, but they're like, go to that dock, and like we get on it, and he takes us to the next boat and the next island, and
yeah.
It was pretty
People
amazing.
really coming together.
Yeah, it comes.
So we do have some slides as promised, so we want to get to those a little bit. You can maybe talk to them. There it is. Now, that's the Sunbeam 5, just to give you an idea of how long this has been going on. That's the 5th version of this, right?
Yeah.
How long is that boat?
74 feet.
And what's it got in there? Let's see.
Well, on the crew is the captain, an engineer, the chaplain, the nurse, and a steward. And the steward is a really important part of this boat because, like, there are no restaurants or stores on most of these islands. So when we come in, we're a gathering place. And there's always food and meals. And there's 3 cookie jars at the end of the counter, which is just like a 100-year tradition. So everybody they call it the cookie boat sometimes. And like, when we come in, like if there's a new baby it's always a big deal. This is the first time the baby has come into the boat.
Onto the cookie boat.
And all the school kids come down. We have music. I would have a lot of educational talks. So it's a great place. And that's the salon.
Yeah, and so that serves as both a medical place and a food place and, a gathering place, right?
I mean, the mission really tries to take care of the whole community, and it's all about bringing people together.
Yeah.
And this is just me and a lobsterman. I used to do lab draws and screening clinics.
But wait a minute, gets a little rough to be doing blood work?
You learn to do this. You do.
Do that again. You learn it, like you're actually like doing that with the wave?
When the boat is moving, yeah, you kind of just get in.
That's pretty wild. Okay.
And this is the telemedicine room, and this is a physician that I worked with, Scott Schiff-Slater, who was just great on Idaho. And, it's just a flat screen TV, but I had a stethoscope so the provider I could let him listen to the patient's heart and lungs. I had a handheld camera, so if somebody had a sore throat, I could do that, or if they had a problem with their leg, I could have them walk down the hallway, and so he could see that. I had an otoscope so that he could see their eardrum if they had an ear infection.
Oh, so this is telemedicine from the boat. So you're on an island, and a patient comes into the salon or whatever and says, I've got this problem, and then you're wired up to the doctor. And where's that doctor?
Right. Depends. He was in Hollowell. Mm-hmm. Some of them were in MDI. Some of them were at different clinics. The behavioral health people could be various places. So they would come on. I would do a quick intake. I'd do their vital signs, get their insurance information, send all that off. And then sometimes people wanted me to stay in the room with them while they did the appointment. Sometimes they didn't, so I would go out, and then the provider would call me in at the end and say, will you do this lab draw, will you do this, I want to see them in 2 months, and will you go over this new medication with them, so.
Okay, here's the map, and let's see. I don't have a laser beam here, so I can't really point to anything.
Some of them are around, not all of them are.
There's Idaho is one of those the big red square there. There's Frenchboro, I can see it. I don't know how much you all can see out there.
Granbury is above Frenchboro.
And Matinicus is the bottom left.
Yeah.
There's no one on Chris Haven, I gather, is there?
Cree Haven's not a year-round population. They're there in the summer.
Okay. All right. To get an idea.
Just some pretty pictures of Idaho.
Yeah.
And this picture has kind of a story because we had a professional photographer aboard that the mission had come out to take pictures. And I got up early, and this was a sunrise, and I took this picture with my phone. He was asleep downstairs. And when he saw this picture, he almost cried. He's like, so we put this picture up on this Maine Seacoast Mission website, and it was picked up by all of these sunrise specialty, like there's people that just do sunrise pictures, and it was the most viewed picture ever on some of these. So.
Not the professional photographer's one.
Yeah, and we had all this, he had zoom lenses and all these tripods, but
that's amazing.
There was some beautiful sunrises there.
Yeah. Okay, there's Matinicus, and you can see those tides, right? Or see the marks of them. That's amazing.
It's definitely a working waterfront.
Yeah. There's Frenchboro, right?
Yeah.
So And what were some of the range of things that you've had to do? I mean, some of the more outlier procedures that you had to find yourself doing.
A lot of this stuff was the regular, like blood pressures and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But, some of the specialty things were like what to do if there is an emergency, which I always say emergencies can only happen at night in a storm on an island that life flight can't come to. So, that was a big part of my job, which the island would really help me with. But like, if you had an emergency, did this person need to get off the island then, or could you wait? And I had such great providers. Everybody, including the psychiatrists that I worked with, I had all of their phone numbers, their cell phone numbers, their home phone numbers, so I could always get somebody from the boat. Usually there wasn't good cell reception anywhere else. And I would call and we would talk it over like, okay, what do you have to do? Do you need to get them off tonight? And if the answer was yes, then you had to figure how that was going to be. And usually it was a lobster boat, because if we were grounded out, obviously we couldn't, but also the boat was so slow, the lobster boats are fast. So then you started, I would say, what's the fastest boat on the island?
You would ask around, like, what's the fastest boat on the island?
Yeah.
And people would generally say, okay, I'll do it?
Yeah. Oh, they always said yes.
And so what were some of the things that happened?
Diabetic problems, like really high blood sugar, somebody having seizures, somebody having a miscarriage that was a real problem that they had to have, go into surgery. So once a suicidal person. So,
do helicopters ever go out there?
They do, but unfortunately it seemed to be like whenever I was out there and there was an emergency, it was like they couldn't come because it was foggy or whatever. There's a lot of weather that they can't come to islands in.
Right. I think you mentioned that mental health was something you got pretty involved in as well.
Yeah, we didn't plan, the program wasn't set up for that, but once I started, I realized that there was a need for it. And it was kind of interesting because the people doing the telemedicine, the providers, were more reluctant to do it over telemedicine than the people were. I mean, and islanders engaged technology really quickly because it opened up a whole world for them. But luckily I did find providers, and they, confidentiality on an island is hard. People come on the boat, but they didn't know what was going on once somebody came into my room. They didn't know what kind of a visit it was. But people started saying, yeah, I'm going there for counseling. And I had some kids that were in counseling, and I remember this little kid came out and he goes, yeah, I just had my counseling appointment. And the lobsterman goes, yep, and I'm going in and having mine. And, it really helped people to talk about it and become not ashamed of it.
And they were doing these counseling sessions with you?
With a counselor.
Or with a counselor, right, yeah.
And I also always tried to bring my providers out to the island occasionally so that they could be there in person and they could see what the islands were like.
Right. Let's see what else we got here. That is a lobster boat.
Yeah, High Islander, people always wonder what that means, but that's an Idaho boat, and Idaho means high island.
Got it. Yeah, it could be a double entendre for somebody, but yeah.
But it's definitely a working lobster boat.
Right. Oh, that airstrip looks a little spicy.
Yeah, it is, but the Penobscot Air that runs the service is just the best service in the world, and the best pilots. And one of the things that I did was there was somebody that had gone to upper state New York and became very ill and really needed to come back home. He was dying, and they asked me would I fly with them to upper state New York. It was a long flight.
Yeah.
And, in a little plane. And I remember the pilot said to me at one point, he goes, "Oh, that's interesting." I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "See how you can't tell the skyline from the ground there? That's just what happened when Kennedy put his plane down." And I'm like, "But we're not doing that, right?" He goes, "Oh, no, we're fine."
Wow. Yeah, that's what occurred to me when you started telling that story.
But there was a plane that did go down in a freak kind of accident on Matinicus. And when that happened, the Sunbeam, we were on another island, but we went there because they had to keep the body on the island overnight. And the minister was with us, and he wanted to go out to be there. And then we opened up the boat and served breakfast, and everybody on the island came down to the boat as a gathering place. And there's still somebody on that island that every time he mentions that, he cries, because he says how wonderful it was for the boat to be there and for us to be there and for them to have a place to come together. So wow. The Sunbeam does a lot of different things.
Yeah, it does. And then you had to bring the deceased back off the island?
Especially on Matinicus, if there's somebody that dies, and it used, people before there was so much cremation was in caskets on the back of the boat. There's tie downs where they would and so occasionally still will put the casket on the boat and bring it out to Matinicus to be to the graveyard there. And even if there's not, often the boat will go to Rockland to bring people out to the island to the service.
Right. Yeah, and the population of these islands is getting older, right? I mean, a lot of your work is elder care at this point.
Yeah, but if you get enough health issues and you're elderly enough, mostly now you kind of have to move off.
Right. It's like what it's like with the weather.
It's just what a one-room country schoolhouse looks like. And now that school has nobody in it right now.
Someone's
People
calling
ask, do you go in the winter? And I'm like, yeah, that's the most important time we go.
Does it cut through ice?
Yeah, it was built to be an ice breaker. And we have broken, like if it freezes, like Isla Ho froze in one year. So no boat traffic at all, which meant they couldn't get groceries, they couldn't get mail, so we went and broke ice.
How often do you think the islanders go back and forth, just sort of the regular people, to go get food and stuff, to go shopping?
Depends on what island it is and how it's going to get there. And people used to ask me that, how do you get the medication out there? And I'm like, it depends on what day of the week it is, what the weather is, and how bad it's needed. So on Matinicus, it's often flowing out, or lobstermen's bring it out. Frenchboro, they have a ferry occasionally. Swans has a daily ferry. The mailmans that bring the mail out, that was one way that we would do it. I mean, Matinicus has been known to fly over and drop it.
Drop it?
If they can't land.
You mean like with a parachute drop it? Anyone using drones yet?
Not that I know of.
Maybe coming.
And sea smoke. It was when I took this job, I was sitting on the boat looking out the window, and a lobsterman had brought us a bucket full of lobsters, and I sent it to all the nurses I worked with and said, my view is great and the food is great. So this was, I forget what photographer was on, but they were doing a little story about us, and they're like, oh, we'll take the picture with Sharon. You can tell they are just giving me such a hard time.
You look like you're enjoying it, though. So.
Yeah, I was. They're making me laugh.
Yeah. We can open up to some questions if any of you all have any questions to ask Sharon. Let's see. Do we have one here? I'm trying to think. Oh, okay. Well, I can keep going because I've got a million questions to ask. Oh, we got one here? Okay, great, up there, yep. Hang on, wait 1 second, because we have a microphone coming too.
You guys, I've had to talk a lot. It's your turn.
Yeah, she's going to start asking you questions, she told me.
I apologize, I did not hear the beginning of this, but how did you get involved in this?
I couldn't hear.
I couldn't hear either, I'm sorry.
How did you get involved initially?
How did I do what?
In doing this, going out on this? I missed the beginning of your discussion. And how did you get involved in the mission?
Oh, I was doing home health, and actually my husband Tom was running a water taxi off of Islesboro, and the director of the mission, who, because they also supported all the island churches, came out to the island church, and he mentioned to Tom that they were going to be looking for a nurse. And so I immediately applied. And because I think partly because I had done a lot of home health and a lot of different jobs, and because I lived on an island and kind of understood island living, I was lucky enough to get the job.
Great, did you say we have one here? No. Okay. Well, run down here, we have a question also up. I want to go here first. Yeah, down here to this person.
How old were your kids while you were on the?
That's a good
How
question.
old was I?
How old?
No, where were your kids, or how old were your kids, or what were they doing when you were?
You guys were older, right? Were you out of high school pretty much when I took that job?
And I do have a follow-up question that is totally irrelevant to your mission, but is your roommate still married to your husband's roommate?
Is your roommate still married to your husband's roommate?
No. They were married for a long time, but then they got divorced. I mean, they had families together and stuff. It's kind of interesting, like, I didn't get seasick. And people and there are so many people from Maine that would be on the boat that would get seasick, and they were always kind of so pissed off that, like, I'm a farm Missouri girl, and, like, I didn't get seasick. But we had a steward that did get seasick, and I don't know how she kept that job. I would have.
Yeah, that's not a good combination, the steward and seasick.
Yeah. But she was okay, but then underway, like, oh, she would be so, I remember once she was so sick, and I said to her, Pat, are you okay? And she said, yes, but if I ever make it to Matinicus, I'm living there.
That's funny. Question here? One, yeah, back here. Uh-huh.
Do you have a favorite island or a community that is most dear to your heart?
Oh, this is being live streamed. I would never answer that question.
Smart.
I loved them all.
Sort of like kids then, right?
Huh?
Sort of like kids?
Yeah.
Some here. Question here. Uh-huh.
Hi, Sharon, and thank you for this talk. My question is, it sounds like oftentimes these journeys were very complicated, difficult. When things got to be this way, if you were traveling through a storm or, maybe having a rough day, what motivated you to keep up with this job in spite of it being so difficult and challenging at times?
Definitely the hardest part of my job was if the weather was bad and I had to call my patients, because they would make appointments ahead of time, mostly. And I would have to say, I'm not going to be able to make it there. And then I would have to call all of the providers and say, sorry, all that time you put aside for me, not going to use it. So that was my biggest frustration and really, really hard. I guess what motivated me was just, nurses like to help people. So, it was the people that I was able to help that motivated me. And I guess this is a good time to say, I feel like the only reason I can even accept this award is that I'm accepting it for all of the nurses that work so hard and do such good things.
Yeah, I hear that. And how are people how are people paying for their medical assistance out in these islands?
The Maine Seacoast Mission does not charge for anything that they do. So my salary was paid by the mission. Anything I did was free. And then when they saw a provider, I would give them their insurance, and they would bill the insurance. And there was always ways to help if they didn't have money to pay. And the mission has got an endowment because they've been around for over 100 years, and they're a well-loved organization with a lot of support, known for doing good work. And they do a lot of other things besides island work. They have a wonderful school program in Washington County. They do all kinds of things. So we sometimes would get grants and the endowment and donations.
Do you think this way of life can continue out there? Do you have a successor or someone doing your work right now?
There is a nurse, yeah, that's doing that. And, you know, telemedicine's changed because people can do it with a laptop. But it's better for nurses there. So, you know, I guess certainly the islands are different than they were 50 years ago, and they'll be different 50 years from now. I don't have a crystal ball as to what that will be like, but I hope it doesn't change completely.
Okay, just a couple last questions. And what do you like to do nowadays? What are you doing?
What do I do now?
Mm-hmm. What do you like to do now?
I
mean, that's such
garden.
going from that to like not doing that.
Yeah.
Must have been a big change.
It was an adjustment. I'm a big gardener. Can't take the farm girl away too far, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I do a lot of gardening. I'm involved in different things on the island. We have an elder care home, an 8-bed elder care home on Islesboro, which I helped start with a lot of other people. So I'm involved in that. I still stay in contact with a lot of island people. I go out and visit in the summer. So.
We had a question here from the audience. Huh? Go ahead.
How did the islanders deal with childbirth, and did you ever have to assist in the delivery of a baby?
What about childbirth? Did you ever have to assist in the delivery of a baby?
No. I definitely didn't want to. Most women go off before they're due, and that would be the only wise thing to do. You know, if you want to have a home birth, don't do it on an island. I don't think, at least. So, I would have been terrified.
And there were problems with drug addiction and violence that you had to deal with?
Yeah, there's always, you know, I don't ever want to paint the islands as, you know, all drug addicts, but obviously there's drugs everywhere and alcohol. So, you know, I worked with people around that. One of the things that I helped facilitate was setting up an AA group over mostly phone and Zoom that was just for island people, because it's different trying to get sober on an island than it is somewhere else. You can't change your peer group. It's just harder. So this group would meet to kind of, because they understood the problems. So they would do a Zoom group. And I had a list of AA people and other people so that if somebody came aboard and said, I have a problem with alcohol, I could connect them with somebody immediately that they could talk to help guide them through getting help and support. You know, domestic violence. It's domestic violence just like anywhere. I took out a domestic violence worker to give a talk on how to help and how to support, because obviously it's hard for the person that's involved in that, but it's also hard on the neighbors because, you know, the woman in this case I was thinking of would go to a neighbor's house and ask to be hidden for the night, which puts everybody in a kind of sketchy situation, but also the fact that usually they would go back into the situation the next day. It's very hard for neighbors to understand, like, why would you go back? You know, it's a hard thing to understand in those So I brought out a domestic violence worker to do a talk on that, and that worked really well. I think it was a great education thing. And I was the person, like the police forces and the domestic violence people had my phone number, so that if somebody did want to get off an island, they knew that I could figure out how to get them off without using the public transportation that was available. So that, you know, it's a lot of specialty things, a lot, like, you know, when I started this job, all of these things that I hadn't thought about, but as they developed, you just kind of tried to figure out how to help.
It's the whole range of the human experience that you had to deal with.
Yeah. It's
really remarkable. And you have some family members here today, right?
What?
You have some family members here
Lots
today.
of family members, yeah.
Yeah,
Daughters, husband, sister-in-laws, nieces, and friends from Islesboro.
Well, that's great.
I
Well,
almost
welcome to all
started
of you
to say
all. I'm
Isles.
so glad you could join us today. My final question, and it's a very important one. Have you ever seen the TV show The Pit?
Seen what?
The TV show The Pit.
Oh, yeah, he said it was, yeah, and I liked it.
It's not too close to home for you?
No, I was not like, God, no. I could have used them a couple of times. I don't know how many of you know that Doc Martin, that TV show, he also came out with us. He chose Islands of Maine, and that was fun, too.
Well,
He's a producer. And I told him when he was filming, I want to be the person to yell, cut.
I think they should make a TV show out of your life and the work that you did. That would be really something. Please join me in thanking Sharon Daley and congratulating her.